China stated that it has never sent weapons to Iran, but it will not do so anymore. This strange statement sounds like the famous Chernomyrdin phrase, "It never happened, it never happened," and here it is again. But how did someone manage to convince China to stop? Well, who is that someone? We know who that is, the incomparable Donald J. Trump. Well, we'll talk about that in the second part of our video. And by the way, closer to the end, we'll also talk about the scandal between Trump and the Vatican. The Iranian resistance, the opposition inside Iran is growing. Someone, I suspect Mossad, is supplying them with explosives, and the regional headquarters of the Corps are being blown up. But Iranians are so full of hatred for the regime that they're ready to strangle the Basij, which is, as I understand it, like they also have Sajak. But these are the active squads that shoot people in the streets. People hate them and the whole regime so much that they're ready, with their bare hands and little pocket knives, to kill them one by one. Just now, the head of the regional branch of the Basij was killed, stabbed. I don't even know how to put it more precisely. Yes, they found stab wounds on him. As I understand it, this is their local security service.
We have some truly shocking news. It seems that a whole series of murders and assassination attempts have taken place in Iran, including the killing of one of the key leaders responsible for the crackdown on Iranian citizens. During the protests that took place at the end of December and the beginning of January, the exact number of people killed still remains largely unknown, but some estimates reach 45,000 people, while other estimates put the number at 30,000. But we do know for sure that thousands of Iranian citizens were killed, and one of the people responsible for this has now been killed under secretive, entirely unclear circumstances, with all the details still very murky.
This sweet, kind, and gentle man, of course, was in charge of executing desperate protesters, the kind who are first identified, then found, and when possible, killed. From defectors, we know that China actively helped Iran. Well, first of all, to target missiles at American ships, at airplanes, at equipment in general, and it seems that the blood of the 13 American soldiers killed is also on their hands.
It says It is reported that overnight, the separatist group from Avaz carried out killings and terrorist attacks using bombs in several cities. Thus, we know that attempts on key leaders, key figures, police chiefs, military commanders, and state security officials are being carried out in Avaz or by Avaz separatist groups. These are the ones considered responsible. We will move on to other incidents for which we really don't know who is responsible. They carry out bombings, targeted assassinations. This may indicate that an uprising is beginning to emerge and develop in Iran as they are starting to identify and eliminate various elements of the leadership structure in the most brutal and violent way.
This is probably the final nail in the coffin if they sign this deal with the Americans, because the entire regime is completely divided and the Iranian people continue to resist. We will talk about this. We will also, as I mentioned, discuss the latest videos and updates we have about what happened last night and this morning in the capital in Tehran, as armed Iranian groups continue to eliminate IRGC leaders and commanders. Since yesterday, we have witnessed a series of attacks carried out by anti-Islamist occupying Iranians.
On the other hand, the U.S. is helping the Crown Prince, the heir to the Shah, that is Reza Pahlavi Tektu. He is trying to consolidate support in Europe, and by the way, here is a snippet from his speech in Sweden.
They would rather die standing than live a miserable existence on their knees, and I would do the same.
Churchill understood such people very well when he said that nations do not die when their soldiers fall. They die only when their spirit is broken and they surrender.
I'm hearing his public statements for the first time, and he's becoming more and more like a leader. He should, of course, be in a constitutional monarchy, like in England, and get rid of fanatics from the army, the government, and especially, of course, from the spiritual life of this ancient nation of 93 million people. But let's get back to China.
Beijing has been playing a very complicated game for a long time. For decades, they've been buying Iranian oil for next to nothing, reshaping the Middle East in their own image, watching as America bleeds in endless wars that have led literally nowhere, and quietly assuming that one day they will inherit the whole world. Well, Operation Epic Fury just blew that plan to pieces.
What happened? Why did China's plans fall through? Why won't we supply weapons to Iran anymore?
Because right now the Iranian regime is on the verge of collapse due to the blockade. Beijing is watching as 40 to 50% of its oil supplies are cut off in the Strait of Hormuz, while the United States has simply slipped out through another door. The signing of a major defense cooperation partnership with Indonesia places American eyes and assets directly in the Strait of Malacca, the single most important choke point for Beijing.
They signed it in February and revealed some details. Recently, our minister, what we now call the Minister of War, also visited Indonesia. I'll talk a bit more about that later. It turns out the Indonesians agreed to block the so-called re-export of Chinese goods so that the Chinese couldn't. Lately, they've been taking advantage of this by bringing their goods into countries like India or others, labeling them as Indonesian, transferring them to other containers, and then shipping them to the U.S. to sell. In addition, Indonesia has lifted restrictions on the import of about 99% of American goods, and Indonesia has also pledged not to sell to China. That means anything that could be used for war or for armaments. Trump is building a coalition ahead of his visit to China, which is happening right now, yes. I would even say he has already built it, a coalition that includes a huge number of China's neighbors. This includes Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, the Philippines, and now Indonesia, creating a kind of trade cordon around China. Well, that's what China tried to do in our, as we say, hemisphere. Yes, the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Panama with the canal, yes. But China didn't succeed because Trump, as they say, intervened in time and disrupted all their plans. Since Trump completely destroyed their attempts to do it here, and now, so to speak, he is doing it quite successfully, right under their noses. So China changed some of its ideas about how to live in the world. Now, from all these countries I mentioned, coffee, cocoa, rubber, spices, palm oil, and so on are now imported here duty-free. Indonesia, by the way, will be buying American gas for $13.5 billion, which is a huge amount for them. And probably most importantly, the U.S. gets access to nickel, bauxite, and so-called rare earth metals. Red Kazumi, as they're called in Russian. China froze but swallowed it. China still has its neighbors and only North Korea, so
Myanmar.
I just can't remember how to pronounce it, Laos, well, and of course Russia, yes, with whom they have relations like with allies. There's also India, but it plays both sides, so to speak. Even Vietnam has shifted toward the U.S. All the neighbors are afraid of Chinese expansion, not to mention Japan, well, Taiwan and South Korea, which are basically, so to speak, ours, yes. China is practically surrounded by U.S. allies. India seems to be signing an agreement to purchase American energy for $500 billion, no more, no less. There are rumors going around that it includes a commitment not to buy from Russia. If the U.S. gets its hands on, say, Iranian oil and gas, and effectively controls the Strait of Hormuz, then it will be hard for Russia to find buyers. China is buying, but they're buying at a 40% discount, which is, of course, terrible for Russia's budget. Oil prices are going up, but they're getting 40% less. And it's already almost clear that the Iranian regime, which is falling apart, sees this as their only way out. They can surrender with honor because if they don't, the second option is that they'll be honorably delivered to the morgue.
The Iranian regime is on the verge of complete collapse. The United States naval blockade is squeezing the last strength from the Iranian regime like a boa constrictor. And keep in mind that this regime was already in agony long before the first American bomb fell. The Iranian rial, their currency, had already lost 60% of its value before Operation Epic Fury began. Food inflation soared to 105% year over year. Unemployment was between 30% and 40% in real terms. The regime had already issued its largest banknote in history, a 10 million rial note, just 1 month after introducing the 5 million rial note. because money is so worthless. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, estimated that inflation would remain above 40% throughout 2026. And again, that's before a single American B-2 bomber took off from Diego Garcia. Now, on top of this disaster, add a war as well. Add Iranian factories, energy facilities, bridges, railways, all completely destroyed. The petrochemical sector is operating maybe only at half its capacity. The regime has already shut down internet access for 47 days straight. Their own Ministry of Telecommunications admitted that this costs the economy $4,050 million every day. Tax revenues, which make up 43% of the government's income, have collapsed, and now the blockade of the Persian Gulf. Remember, the Persian Gulf accounts for 90% of Iran's trade. The U.S. Navy shut it down in the first 24 hours of this blockade. No Iran-linked vessel has passed through. A critically important channel was completely blocked. Remember, Iran deceived itself by believing that closing the Hormuz Strait was their nuclear option. They thought it was their ace up their sleeve, right? Their last card. They played it, and then Trump saw their cards and raised the stakes to infinity. The U.S. Navy officially and effectively blockaded Iran. We blocked their blockade. More than 90% of Iran's trade goes through the Gulf. Saudi Arabia has land pipelines from east to west, fully operational, running through the Red Sea. Thus, the Gulf states have diversified their options. America is a net exporter of energy resources. Iran has absolutely no such alternatives. So the regime played its so-called nuclear trump card, and they lost. It turned out to be a grand failure for them.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, a short break to have a laugh. Here's what the Putin supporters write and say about the U.S. and Trump, whom they themselves, well, I would say, constantly call Putin's lackey and his agent Krasnov. Here's the perpetually drunk so-called bear, also known as Dimok, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, a quote from Vesti.ru, I quote. Ahead of Trump is Iran, which he couldn't conquer, and behind him is the American opposition, which wants to strip him of power, and as quickly as possible. Every move on this board creates a situation close to zugzwang. Let me translate that into Russian. Zugzwang is when any move a player makes only makes things worse. No matter what you do, your situation keeps getting worse. That's about us, about Trump. Now that means Irina Alksnis, RIA Novosti, April 8th. The attack on Iran is a poorly thought out and terribly planned military and political adventure. Irina, thinks she's a commander, and also, according to her, the Americans suffered serious losses, 13 people. The Israeli Iron Dome turned out to be full of holes. Okay. And the Gulf monarchies, that is, the Gulf monarchies took a serious hit as allies of the United States. So everyone got hit. Everyone suffered. At what bar did she get so drunk that this is what's going on in her head? Rajab Saparov. This is the Center for Contemporary Iran Studies, Radio. You won't believe this right now. Komsomolskaya Pravda, from April 9th. Can you imagine that? Komsomolskaya Pravda. Komsomolskaya can't be the truth by definition. Well, never mind. So here's a quote. The U.S. was forced to agree to a ceasefire. What? He knows for sure. It humiliated America and acknowledged Iran's growing role as a key player in the region. He's either drunk like Medvedev or he's sniffing something. I don't know what he's sniffing. Maybe glue. The Europeans aren't far behind either, although it's quite possible that in Russia, when they reprint it, they pretend it's Der Spiegel, for example, or something like that. But this is in the Russian news, meaning Info SMI. They published it on April 10th. The IRGC, well, the core, yes, became the main winner of this war. I think we should shout hooray and throw our hats in the air. It survived attacks from the U.S. and Israel and is still capable of carrying out precision missile strikes. So they get punched in the face, but sometimes they stick their heads out, strike quickly, and then hide again. And that's how they won. And Spiegel is happy, along with all of Russia and Ukraine. Yes, so the same Spiegel continues writing. The regime, again, I don't know if this is Spiegel or just the imagination of Russians. The regime supposedly having suffered a crushing defeat, like the Iranian regime, yes, forced the superpower USA, meaning they didn't actually suffer a defeat, so supposedly having suffered a crushing defeat, forced the superpower USA to negotiate the terms of a new regional order in the interests of the Islamic Republic. Well, the Jews say this, oy vey. Margarita Simonian, well, she's just a champion, so on NTV in that same April, yes, this show. And it follows the logic of a show. It's about the actions of the U.S. in Iran. But what does it mean, charming Margot? No one understood. I think it doesn't mean anything at all. They just needed to fill in, well, they needed to write a certain number of letters there, yes. Again, in the Russian segment, something allegedly written by NetEase is being widely circulated on InnoSMI. Okay, it's quite possible that this is a very serious publication and I've just never heard of it. Iran showed the world, so maybe they're making up some Western publications, and then supposedly something is written there and we write translations, right? Iran showed the world a simple truth. In a modern conflict, the winner is not the one who has more aircraft carriers and satellite images. Not the one who has more aircraft carriers and satellite images. So, not more aircraft carriers, but in satellite images, right? But the one who doesn't run out of shells after a month of fighting. God, they're all so dumb. I'll continue. The war with Iran didn't become a blitzkrieg. It didn't. No. It's already been going on for 6 weeks. Tehran chose the path of an asymmetric response, dragging the Americans into a war of attrition. This choice turned out to be fatal. For whom? For the reputation of a superpower. That is, after crushing the entire military-industrial complex in just 4 weeks, that is Iran with a population of 93 million. And at the end of the 5th week, they shut down the economy. That's not a blitzkrieg. And 4 years in Ukraine, that's both blitz and krieg at the same time. There you go, Malik Dudikov. So he presents himself as a U.S. expert. It says Malik Dudikov, U.S. expert, Caucasus Herald. April 13th. The Trump administration is in an extremely difficult situation. To accept Iran's terms would mean de facto admitting their defeat. Yes, he's right. If we accept Iran's terms, it means if America accepts Iran's terms, then it means defeat. You're right. It's just that no one is going to accept them. Well, in general, Comrade Malik Dudikov, you're right. Vesti.ru, citing New Statesman, is being circulated in Russia. Trump's major military operation has transformed from an attempt to block Iran's nuclear potential into an attempt to unblock America. The Strait of Hormuz. Sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Block the nuclear potential, unblock the Strait of Hormuz, and restore the situation that existed before the operation began. So, the Americans are now dreaming of restoring the situation that existed before the operation began. The bombarded military theocratic dictatorship began. The military theocratic dictatorship is Iran. And what did it start doing? It began the final collapse of the imperial power of the United States. So it feels like Iran flew to the United States, smashed the entire army to pieces, destroyed all the factories that produce things, all the warehouses. Only the underground warehouses were left, nothing else. And now the collapse, the final collapse of the imperial power of the United States. That's his wet dream, I think, right? The final collapse. Actually, poor Russia. No wonder they say that the best minds left there a long time ago.
With each passing day, they grow weaker while we are obviously becoming stronger. And I'll repeat, the calculation here is extremely simple. Maintain the blockade long enough so that the regime simply can't pay the IRGC or BASIG, the regime's law enforcement structures. If they go without pay for 2 or even 3 weeks, these forces will simply leave. Let me remind you, the regime built its legitimacy mainly on patronage and bribes, and as soon as the money runs out, loyalty to the regime runs out too. As soon as the money runs out, soldiers desert, they go on strike, they go home.
And
as history has shown many times, the moment the army decides to lay down its arms and refuses to shoot, the government falls. The regime is left with only about 10 to 15% internal support. Their leaders haven't appeared in public since the beginning of the war. They're simply too frightened by those precision strikes that destroyed their nuclear program. I mean, this isn't a regime that's winning the war. This is a regime that's literally trying to survive this week.
And here come the Ukrainian younger brothers, Yakovenko, or maybe older cousins.
Trump has clearly set a course for an alliance, for closer ties with Russia, for an alliance with Russia. He and Putin speak the same language. He and Putin share common values, a common worldview.
But not all despots on the planet are as theatrical and as amusing as Trump.
His understanding of economic policy is, so to speak, that of a native Среднего Запада, 19 век.
Trump will fake a victory. He will pretend there's a victory where there isn't one.
Thank you, you funny, helpless, discarded remnants of kitchen dissidents. Some of them were informers, of course, and some were just open KGB agents. We won't name names, as they say, but we all know. Now it's once again considered honorable to be a major, a general, or a lieutenant colonel in that organization of torturers. They used to be untouchable. Yeah. It used to be shameful to associate with them. But now they're invited to TV shows and aren't embarrassed to introduce themselves. See, this one informed on writers, and that one on students, see? And this one, for example, sold out his brother, his sister, and all his colleagues or classmates, whoever. Of course, I love them, yeah. Well, as Jesus Christ taught, but I love them with a strange kind of love. But I promised to tell you about China, so? What drove them in the Celestial Empire? You'll find out now. But if not everything, then almost everything will become clear.
And so China enters the scene. Beijing was watching all of this very, very closely, and I have to say they were simply horrified. I mean, just look at this data. This information became known literally today. China's export growth in March collapsed, dropping to just 2.5%. This is a decrease compared to the 22% growth in January and February. It's a catastrophic slowdown. Gasoline prices in China have already jumped by 11% since the start of the war. This price spike is now hitting tens of millions of jobs, especially in China's chemical and oil refining industries. Remember, China gets about 45 to 50% of its imported crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran alone supplied about 11% of China's total oil imports, and the American blockade is set up brilliantly. It doesn't just stop ships heading to Iranian ports. It stops any vessel that has paid a transit fee to Iran when passing through this strait. So, essentially, oil supplies to China from the Persian Gulf are completely cut off, or at the very least, severely restricted. That's why Beijing accused Washington of being irresponsible, dangerous, and reckless. A pair of Chinese ships tried to test the blockade. They turned around. Right now, China actually has significant strategic reserves, just over 1 billion barrels in storage. That gives them, well, a couple of months, maybe 3 or 4 months of breathing room. But, as Steve Yates, a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, put it, China, frankly, is being forced to make a choice for the first time. For years, they played both sides. They were getting American oil and Iranian oil, but now they can't. And they can't because Trump just made a move that may have checkmated Beijing on the international stage forever for the rest of this century and beyond.
I don't agree that it was just one move. This game has been played since day one of Trump 47, and it hasn't slowed down for a single day. Everything Trump did had the ultimate goal of restraining China. I told you about Indonesia, right? At the beginning of our conversation about the trade agreement. So, this is what we, the U.S., signed with this largest Muslim country in the world, which makes me very nervous because of the fact that China is cracking down on Muslims very harshly.
Here's a brilliant move that most people completely overlook. While the world was watching the Strait of Hormuz, the Trump administration quietly slipped through another door. On April 13th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth signed a major defense cooperation agreement with Indonesia. The deal includes expanded joint training, deployed sensors, integrated American surveillance technologies, joint special forces training, and joint development of next-generation autonomous systems for maritime and underwater operations. And what does all this mean? The Strait of Malacca is a narrow sea passage between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, connecting the Indian Ocean with the South China Sea, and about 23 million barrels of oil pass through it every day. So that's 29% of all the world's seaborne oil trade, and almost half of those shipments go where? Where? To China. So now you understand what happened here. In Hormuz, we blocked the oil supplies from the Persian Gulf to China. In Malacca, we now have sensors, surveillance technology, joint forces, and overflight access, which basically allows American eyes and assets to control another major energy artery for China, the Strait of Malacca. This is what checkmate looks like in geopolitics. It doesn't happen with one dramatic blow. It happens quietly, mechanically, methodically, piece by piece, until one morning Xi Jinping wakes up and realizes that the board has been completely rearranged under American control while he was busy threatening Taiwan. Well,
you probably want to understand what exactly happened between Trump and the Pope.
Yes. So, my analysis of the Pope is that the two of them are engaged in
two completely different kinds of activities, and there's no connection, although I think I could establish one. But right now, Trump sees the Pope as in to the detriment of this, and the Pope considers Trump a warmonger. Do you expect this to change?
No, I don't know. But listen, these two entities don't have to pursue opposite goals, right? Because America was founded on the ideal of fighting for religious freedom, and we had the Black Robe Regiment, right? We had pastors who preached in church and then took off their robes and went out to the field to fight alongside the colonists. And you know, the Pope doesn't have to choose between faith and biblical principles in supporting the war. The Pope has plenty of opportunities to express his opinion about the evil of the regime while still continuing to call for peace. These two things don't have to be.
But I haven't heard his opinion about the evil of the Iranian regime, have you?
No, he hasn't, and that's problematic. That's why I think Donald Trump is absolutely right in criticizing the Pope's actions here.
What about using his image as Jesus? And Trump didn't do it himself, but he passed it along. It's deleted now, but when I saw it, I thought, this won't help anything.
It's more than just not helping. It's actually offensive. I'm a Christian. It hurt me, and I'm still a Trump supporter, and I just wrote an article for the Washington Times criticizing Trump about this when he deleted it from social media, so I'm not sure if I'll publish it or not. But look, the evangelical community loves Donald Trump and they support Donald Trump, but there are certain boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. And posting your photo where you look like Jesus, that's just too much.
Yes, but it was something more than just some Cheryl. And again, he didn't do it himself, but he spread it. And I just feel like now is absolutely not the time for any kind of frivolity at all. All right, to sum up this whole thing, I see a glimmer of hope regarding the Pentagon's Hormuz strategy, because the Pentagon is obviously leading this process, but I think they'll pull all 93 million people along with them, and that's very difficult. Boyle, that's a tough question.
And the problem here is that members of the media and our so-called European allies, they're almost working on the side of the regime. They're not on the side of freedom, much less on the side of the Iranian people. If the media started to help and report the truth here, and our European allies actually did something besides working against America and Israel, then maybe it wouldn't have to come to the point you just described, where all the people of Iran are subjected to the cruelty of this regime.
Let's end it here. Trump's story with the Pope, not his own father, will blow over. Trump is right in essence, but wrong in the way he expresses it. The Holy or almost Holy Father is absolutely wrong in essence, and in fact behaved like an offended child. I'm not afraid of you. Well, what should he be afraid of? That Trump will send a couple of swaggering goons after him or something? I know, swaggering tough guys or whatever you call them, right? The Pope is the head of 1 billion or more Catholics in the world. Will there be consequences? If it continues, then maybe. If it dies down, one more round, maybe two, and then it fades away, then it will be forgotten and absolutely nothing will change. All right, gentlemen, we'll meet again when new events happen, and I can predict that this will happen very soon. I mean events, because in the Trump era, events come pouring in. Until we meet again, see you.